The Electric State, directed by the Russo brothers, has a budget of $320 million, making it Netflix's most expensive film to date. Let me just give you a little bit of context and compare that to some recent releases. Recent Oscar winner Anora had a budget of $6 million. Alien Romulus had a budget of $80 million. Mickey 17 had a budget of $118 million, and June Part 2 had a budget of $190 million. If you had the Electric State's budget, you could have almost made another 2 June movies, and we're out here waiting for how long for June Messiah? You could have made almost 3 Mickey 17s, or 4 Alien Romuluses, or get this, 53 Anoras. That's right, 53 Anora movies. It is honestly ridiculous money, guys, and I really hate to say it, but watching this movie, I couldn't help thinking the whole time, where has all this money gone? And I understand it's an unfair mindset to go into a movie going, oh yeah, this is probably going to be the greatest thing that I've ever seen because it costs so much money to make. But at the same time, unfortunately, guys, the Electric State, it just completely falls short. So let's get a little bit more into my thoughts on the movie itself and where all this budget could have gone to. So the Electric State follows an orphaned teen who hits the road with a mysterious robot to find her long-lost brother, teaming up with a smuggler and his wisecracking sidekick. It's basically set in like an alternate universe, futuristic 1990s, after this big war between humans and robots, and now they've all kind of been relegated and segregated into this giant fenced off area in the middle of the wilderness. And the main character, she gets a message from a robot who tells her that her brother is still alive, and in order to go and find him, she has to go and venture off into that zone. So this movie is directed by the Russo brothers, and they're responsible for some of the best Marvel movies ever made. But man, straight off the bat, the script for this film was just so cheesy. And look, I really do hate to talk smack about individuals, and maybe it was the writing that let her down, but Millie Bobby Brown's acting here just felt so stilted, disingenuine. Oh man, and this is coming from someone who I never had any problem with her in Stranger Things. I think she does a great job in that show. I haven't watched her in anything else. There's just no emotional weight here in this film. There's moments where you're meant to feel really invested in Millie Bobby Brown's character's relationship with her brother, or there's other moments where it's supposed to be really emotional and tugging on your heartstrings, but instead, it just, again, felt really disingenuine and just kind of made me cringe. I think probably overall that's a fault of the script rather than any one specific actor. Throughout the whole film, I just felt way too aware of the soundtrack, whether it was constant needle drops cutting to songs that Netflix probably paid way too much money for, or whether it was instrumental soundtrack constantly coming into scenes where you're meant to supposedly feel some kind of emotion. It really just felt like there were no moments here that were just left to breathe on their own. And on a side note as well, am I the only one who didn't know that this was a kids' film? Like, is it meant to be a kids' film? Because the marketing to me, I thought I was in for like a science fiction action movie, but instead watching this, it really gives off sort of cheap Spielbergian kind of, you know, E.T. kids kind of vibes, and it just doesn't land that at all. And I was just left going, this is really for kids. But was that just me? It's so unclear what its tone is. Is it meant to be funny? Is it meant to be serious? Is it meant to be thought-provoking? It just feels so confused. The Russo brothers also carry over some of the worst traits from Marvel films. The cringe-worthy humor. There's so many quippy one-liners, jokes that are meant to be very wink-wink, nudge-nudge towards the audience, but instead just come across as so cringeworthy. There were way too many lines here where I was just shriveling up with cringe. Ugh. It just completely takes you out of the stakes of the movie when it's done too many times, or even if it's not done that many times, but the times when it is done, it's done really, really poorly. And on top of that as well, there's just so many plot holes that don't make sense. If you think about a lot of the character motivations, it's just not really there. If you really think hard, none of it makes any sense. And oh man, that final ending shot is just so predictable, guys. And on the themes of this movie, it is so pretentious, but also at the same time, it's so confused in a very loud and clunky way. It seems to be talking about how social media is so bad, guys. You know, it's really terrible to be addicted to your phone. It's bad to be obsessed with escapism. Isn't that a message that we've all heard before? There's this final speech at the end, and it just felt like a complete lecture towards the audience. It's something pretty much all of us agree with. We all know that scrolling mindlessly is a bad thing, and this movie kind of seemed like a thought, wow, this is so original and we're really telling you an important message. We all know this, okay? Can you give me something more nuanced, or make a movie, make a plot that doesn't just shove the message in your face through some kind of exposition style speech at the end? Just let us come to that conclusion ourselves based on the events of the film. Oh man. It also does that really terrible trope that Venom 3 also recently did as well, where towards the end of the film, in the big climactic emotional moment, it shows you this montage of all the emotional moments throughout the film, and it's so cheap too because it's the exact same camera angles that you've actually seen just half an hour and a half ago in the movie. And that kind of thing, to me, it really just feels like they got to the editing room, the director and the editor were like, oh man, the emotion's not landing here, the script and the story just doesn't give enough oomph, so we're gonna try and salvage this sinking ship in the edit by just adding on this extra montage, because that'll really get the audience to feel some genuine emotion, won't it? Yeah, let's do that. It really just reeks of that. And I think, you know, the movie's in trouble and it's not landing very well when the director feels like they need to include that technique. There's so much exposition here that just gets so tiresome. The character arcs and motivations, as I mentioned before, I really don't buy. And then the cast, it just feels like such a waste. Like, for example, Colman Domingo in this, he's an amazing actor and he just turns up with his face projected on a 2D robot face for about a minute here. It's a glorified cameo. And same thing with Giancarlo Esposito. For most of the time, his face is just projected on this 2D screen, which is like the face of a robot. And at the start, I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of a creative or interesting idea. But as the film goes on, you realize, wow, this is all I'm really seeing is like an iPhone screen recording of their face projected onto a robot. That's all I'm going to see them in this movie doing. It really just got laughable towards the end. It just feels really goofy, and it's kind of like they're wearing these Apple Vision Pros. And back on the budget as well, this movie had some big similarities to the Netflix miniseries called Maniac that came out back in about 2018. That series did the whole sort of retro-futuristic 80s, 90s tech world in a much better way, and it actually really landed some emotion for me. It's such a great series, and I highly recommend that you check that one out if you can. And also, this movie just felt like a complete rip-off of the 2023 film The Creator. Now, that movie, it had some incredible CGI, and that only had a budget of 80 million. You could have made 3 duplicates of The Creator, and again, the CGI there looked seamless. It looked incredible. But here, I hate to say it, there's just a bunch of moments where it doesn't look like what you would think $320 million CGI should look like. There were too many moments where I really did notice it, and I'm guessing most of the budget probably went towards the amount of CGI animated robot characters, how much expression they had, composing them into a bunch of shots. Probably almost every shot in this movie was probably a VFX shot. And there's probably a lot of times where I didn't notice it and it was seamless, and quite a lot of them do look quite photorealistic when they're probably 100% CGI. Some of the detail on them does look incredible, but unfortunately, because there's so many VFX shots, there's just some moments where you do kind of notice and go, that's a bit of a janky green screen, or that's a bit of a janky kind of physicality to the robot, or it just doesn't quite look right in that lighting. And unfortunately, that just cheapens the film, even though there's probably 100 other instances where it does it absolutely perfectly. And my main question with that, wouldn't it have been cheaper to build these robots practically, maybe give them a little bit less emotion? I know some of them you couldn't do that, but with others, surely there was a way around it, or maybe you could have written the script or adjusted it a bit so there didn't have to be that many robot characters, and you could have saved some money on the budget there. Or to be honest as well, with the cast, you didn't need to have this many stars, especially when a lot of them was pretty much just glorified voiceovers. You could have had a few more no-names, and I don't think it would have made that much of a difference, and you could have saved a lot of money on this film. And also, it's just sad, and the reason why I don't want to give this that much benefit of the doubt is because it didn't get a cinema release. Netflix, what are you doing? We want to keep cinema alive, and if you're going to spend this much money on a movie, it just seems incredibly stupid not to give it a cinema release. Like, surely you'd recoup some of your funds on that massive budget through box office return. And also at one point, the movie uses a glitch effect that I'm pretty sure I can do right now in After Effects. It just completely took me aback that a $320 million film is using effects that I can create right now out of my bedroom. So on the small positives, I guess the world aesthetic looked okay. If I was a child, I would have loved this movie if I was a kid. There was also this pretty cool scene where two characters are walking on water. That looked really impressive. And the robot character, Mr. Peanut, the detail in his face, I just felt like it looked pretty incredible. There's also this magician robot. They looked really cool character design. And overall, the robot design was very cool. So you've got to give kudos to the movie for that. So unfortunately, yes, overall, this was a massive disappointment. Again, I want to admit, I think I came into this film with a bias going, this is going to be terrible. I'd heard bad reviews, I'd heard about the massive budget, and that set this movie up to meet impossible expectations. But with that in mind, just looking at this as a movie in its own right, it's so disappointing. So, unfortunately, I'm going to have to give The Electric State 1.5 out of 5. Look, there are definitely worse movies out there, and I might be being a little bit harsh on it. It could be entertaining to chuck on if you like sci-fi, but I just think there's better movies out there. There's so much better movies out there. And unfortunately, the terrible run of movies that we're in right now in 2025 continues. The only movie that I'd say I liked this year so far has been Mickey 17. So we're not doing so well, but I've got faith that there's some great stuff coming out soon. Maybe you agreed with one or two things that I said. Please consider leaving a like and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.